Welcome to another new episode of Conversations with Commissioners, our thought-provoking conversational podcast about current issues through a multicultural lens. Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Judy Tang, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm a Commissioner at the Victorian Multicultural Commission, and the acronym being VMC. On behalf of the VMC, I'd like to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are the traditional owners of the land that is now Victoria, and pay my respect to the First Nation elders, past and present, always was and always will be. For those of you who don't know, here at the VMC, we strengthen cultural diversity in Victoria through community consultation, advocacy and support. Our aim is to bring people together to share, celebrate and preserve our diverse cultures for future generations. In today's episode, I'm so excited and absolutely honoured to bring you Todd Fernando, Victoria's Commissioner for the LGBTIQ+ communities. Todd is Australia's first ever young, queer and Indigenous Commissioner, being a descendant from the Kalari people of the Wiradjuri Nation. So I thought we could totally discover your journey so far, how you've traversed life to become the leader and person that you are today. Then I thought we can embark on where to from here for you, because I'm sure you've got lots of wonderful plans and schemes up your sleeve.
Maybe.
Oh. So yeah, big clap, yay, hi Todd.
Woo. Thank you for having me. I'm really, really excited to be able to join and have these conversations, and I think they're timely and important and, you know, really, really allows communities to connect with each other. So thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something that we were talking about beforehand, how we can try and brainstorm and scheme and understand how a lot of our multicultural communities and First Nations and also LGBTIQ+ communities can really work together and support each other, because we are, as you know, Victoria is a very diverse bunch of special people, and we want to make sure we all get along and thrive and be the best that we can be.
I love that. I'm going to use that. We are the bunch of special people
we are
in Victoria.
I know. So how about this? Let's start at the beginning and broadly with you. How was life growing up for you? Was there anything you quickly observed and remembered as a child?
Look, life was great. You know, I grew up in a single parent household with an incredible mother, and 4 sisters, though I have some siblings on my dad's side because, you know, men. But you know, life was really good, and I really got an insight from a very early age about the experience of women and how they are viewed in society, and that really taught me a lot growing up in a household with 5 women. And I remember peeking behind, you know, the curtain of life quite at an early age, and you know, it was really interesting. I grew up in a small country town in central New South Wales called Condobolin, which is popular by Shannon Knoll, the same community. And it was actually my first TV experience on the grand final of Australian Idol, where they cut away to the town of Condobolin, and there I am running across some field, which is hilarious. But you know, when I tell that story in my mind, I'm like, oh, there goes 65,000 years of history, because it's all about Shannon Knoll. But look, it was great. I grew, you know, and it was good to grow up on country, and not many Aboriginal people are privileged to do that. They grow up on somebody else's country, but I was very lucky to grow up in mine, which was great. But you know, like many young queer or gender diverse people, we make the move into the city to explore the nuances of who we are, and I did that as I went to Sydney to go to uni and do fabulous other things, and now I land myself here in Victoria for the last 9 years, which has been great. But look, life was great growing up. Lots of lessons learned.
Interesting. So what prompted the move to Victoria from Sydney?
It was, look, I'd visited Melbourne a few times in work capacities, and it was a really interesting city, very mysterious at the time. And that was in part because when I would come to Melbourne, I would stay in some stuffy hotel in the city and just be here for work. And I had a few friends that were here studying at the University of Melbourne, and they just were like, come to Melbourne. And I was like, umming and ahhing for a while. And so I came down to finish some studies, and never looked back. You know, I remember sitting on the plane. I came down with 2 or 3 suitcases, and I said to myself as the plane was taxiing out of Sydney Airport, I was like, just give it 2 years. Just if after 2 years it's not it, then come back. And 8 years later, a house full of furniture, many friends and connections, and now, my mum calls me the chief gay of Victoria. So here we go.
Oh, I love that, chief gay. Okay, I'm gonna use that next time. That is so cool. Oh, that's awesome. So, Country Town, New South Wales. Was there many multicultural?
There's about 3,000 people that live in Condo. About 35% are Aboriginal. The rest are non-Indigenous, white settler communities. And like every country town in Australia, 1 or 2 Chinese families that operated the local Chinese restaurant. And, I was high school age with the family's son, and so got to know them in that capacity. But, it was... It was a very interesting time, particularly in the 90s and early 2000s, Australia and country town Australia, as certain political groups were rising and, decisions were being made, particularly about the affairs of Aboriginal people. The impact of that was widely felt in country areas. And to say that, racism doesn't exist in those parts of the world would be a lie. But to say that it affected me deeply probably isn't true. Like, I sort of understood it and got it and realized that I could rise above from it and not be succumbed to it. So, it allowed me to just realize that we're all playing a game and that we're all, living in and operating in, these different worlds. And so I've utilized that kind of knowledge throughout my life, and it allows me to not fully be affected by some of the things that happened. That being said, I know that these discriminatory practices like racism and homophobia really do affect people in terrible ways, and so I don't want to diminish that. But for me, it was an opportunity to really learn how to rise above from it. Yeah,
absolutely. I grew up in quite a multicultural area
Actually, I don't even know where you grew up. Where did you grow up?
I'm a Melburnian. I've never left. Really. I'm a North Sider.
Love that.
So well, it's great because I really loved being mixing in with all of the other multicultural kids. So I grew up in a very Italian, Greek, and Lebanese area. So I was the only Asian that was there. So I was like the token.
I love that.
European kind of thing that was there. So I really fit in and I loved it. It was fantastic. But I have to say, growing up, one thing that I felt like I missed out on was a real solid understanding and history and learning of First Nations. And I'm only learning about it now as a much older person, and do you feel like with the education system now that they're doing much better around education around and history of First Nations?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it couldn't be any different than I think the education that we had growing up. And, the education that we had growing up was, particularly in the formal school setting, was very much... This is a dot painting. This is a didgeridoo.
I know, exactly. He's a
boomerang. Yeah. Australia started in 1788. Like, all of these kind of these big concepts. But the other education I had growing up, particularly because I grew up on country, I grew up. My education was so different than some of my non-Indigenous friends because I was able to connect with my culture and country through my family and through that upbringing. And there's a story that I love to tell, which is when I go back home or when I grew up, we would fish on the same rock that my ancestors would fish on and catch these yellow bellies or yabbies out of the river. And in my mind, I'm like, this yellow belly or yabby is the descendant of an ancestor fish that my ancestor would have caught. And that that lineage and that connection to culture and country is fascinating when you think about it in that longevity. But then I ruin it by saying it's the town owned by Shannon Knoll. So
details. details. We don't
Yeah, that's right. And I wish that, some of my friends from Country Town would have had that experience, but or when I talk to people about it, the cost of being Aboriginal in Australia, particularly at the fact that they don't learn as much. But a lot of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander educators and non-Indigenous allies really stood in solidarity around the education system, and it has begun to transform it. So, there's communities now that will understand it in incredible ways, and I think the journey that non-Indigenous Australia, particularly those who are no longer in formal education settings, need to really dig deep and seek out information that is so readily available online or at within literature or within research about the experiences of Aboriginal people. Because when people tell me that, I don't know much, I'm like, we've got every single piece of knowledge currently known to man in the hands, in the palm of our hands. So for me, it's no longer a matter of choice. You have the option to do it in your free time or in formal settings now. So Hop 2 is my very stern suggestion. Yeah,
thank you for that. And that's something I would definitely recommend for a lot of multicultural communities to really have another view of Australia, I suppose, in many ways. So,
or figure out how their ancestor stories weave in. There were people from the African diaspora that were on the first fleet. Yeah. Obviously, there are the Yolngu people who are from Northern Territory, have a 5,000-year-old trade relationship with the Macussans, which is modern-day Southeast Asia. Yeah. And the first mosque in Australia was built in the mid to late 1800s. Like, that's a long period of time to be woven into connecting to what the idea of Australia is. And so, even though people might arrive, today or tomorrow or last week, their stories and their community's culture and stories are really woven into the fabric of Australia, but we sometimes forget that.
Well, speaking of the studies, and everyone can tell you're very knowledgeable, I found out that you are a medical anthropologist. Ooh, fancy.
It sounds fancy.
It sounds amazing. What is it?
Yeah, look, so I did my PhD in medical anthropology, and essentially it's a subfield of anthropology, but it's focused on the relationship between health, illness, and culture. So the study of medical anthropology looks at kind of the beliefs and practices about health across various cultures, and are often then viewed in relationship to how those how health and culture is influenced by the social or religious, political, historical, or economical factors. So, questions that medical anthropologists might begin to answer or look at the world through are like, how does a particular culture define health or illness? What are the roles of doctors or shamans or alternative health practitioners in communities that might differ from, Western mainstreamed communities? Or how, for example, might different conditions be stigmatized or be viewed as taboo or even celebrated in specific cultural contexts? So it's really about seeking out the way in which we can unpack concepts of stress or health or well-being that center culture as a tool in which to be healthy and sustainable.
Oh, amazing. Thank you for sharing that.
No worries.
So you come down to Victoria, you go, this is a pretty cool place. I hang around here for a while. You then started Koori Pride Victoria in 2018. Is there a story behind that? Can you share that with us?
This was around the time when I first met Ro Allen, who used to be the Gender and Sexuality Commissioner, the person that I replaced in this role, who now is the Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commissioner in Victoria.
Hi, Ro, if you're listening. I'm sure you're listening.
Yeah, absolutely. The boss is checking up on us. I met Ro and we connected through talking about building a conference or a retreat for Aboriginal, trans or gender diverse people, particularly brother boys and sister girls. And so I met them, about 7 years ago now. And when I chaired, they asked me to chair the steering group for the Kunga National Retreat. And we brought together, I think, forget the final number, but it was something like 80 or 90 Aboriginal LGBTQ plus people from across Australia to Melbourne for a weekend retreat of just hanging out, connecting. And it was the first time that brother boys were able to meet in a national context ever. And it was the first time, this, back in 2017 or 16, I think it was, that sister girls were able to meet for 20 years, because their last meeting was in Magnetic Island in the late 90s. So it was really a special weekend for us to all connect, and it was at that point we all realized that there were no opportunities within the Victorian LGBTQ plus sector or within the wider Aboriginal community controlled health sector for queer people or gender diverse people to connect. And so me and a bunch of people decided that it was best to begin an organisation, and that has now become Koori Pride Victoria, and it's really stemmed into other organisations across Australia as well. So you have Black in New South Wales, there's a collective up in Queensland, the Sister Girls are slowly building something for themselves in the Tiwi Islands. And so really it spoke volumes, but it also signalled, hey, we don't feel connected to mainstream LGBTQ plus organisations, nor do we feel connected into Aboriginal community controlled organisations. So it really, highlighted that we needed our own space and we needed our own understanding. And so that really kicked it off for me in terms of my own research into it, which is what I did my PhD on, which was looking at the social and cultural factors that shape the health and identity of queer Indigenous people. And that really came out of the experience of Kunga and other things. And then, one of the first cheeky things that I'd said to Ro when I first met them, which was, when you're finished, I'll take the job, thank you. And lo and behold, 6 years later, they called me up being like, what are you doing? And I was like, oh wow, this is,
wonderful. It's really interesting because what you shared has quite a bit of similarities with how AGMC started. So for those who don't know, AGMC is Australian Multicultural LGBTIQ Council, and it was pretty much the same thing. There was the sense of there was not really much space for us to feel like we fit in within the LGBTIQ communities, and also at the same time not entirely being able to be our full self within multicultural communities. So I'm really glad that you're able to put together with a whole bunch of other people, surely, Koori Pride Victoria, because it really is providing that space to bring your full self, as they say. You've been LGBTIQ plus commissioner for nearly a year now.
2 weeks away or 3 weeks away from.
Well, then how's it been? It's almost a year. How's the experience of being LGBTIQ plus commissioner?
It's crazy. I mean, the weight of it all is really, like, the pressure you would know is just is ridiculous. The privacy of your own life is disappearing, but the expectations that community have that you would help them out in all the different ways that they need help is really sometimes overwhelming. But at the same time, you're like, oh, this is so impactful, and you can see the work. And over the last 12 months, I've really started to trust myself even more as I've settled into the position. And the fanfare of, oh my God, you're a commissioner.
Well, I'm gonna have to say, in many ways, the unveiling of you to me was actually at the opening of the Victoria Pride Centre last year in 2021. And I've sort of been kicking myself that I didn't have the privilege of knowing you earlier, because honestly, when I saw and heard you speak that day, it was really inspirational, and it just felt like our LGBTIQ plus communities will be in good hands. So really, thank you for that.
No, thank you for sharing. And that was really daunting for me because, I mean, obviously I had to speak in front of the Premier and the Minister for Health and Equality and Ambulance Services, long title for that one, Mark Foley. And it was really nerve-wracking because it was also, that acting period was a 4-month grueling job interview. And it was my first time to show community what I would do in the role and how I would be. And, I'm not Ro Allen, and Ro and I are completely different people, and that's okay. And so it was very nerve-wracking, but I put on my best queer pink outfit.
And you look fabulous. So did you have any areas of focus moving into the role? Like, did you have like, you know what, I'm going to do X, Y, Z my time as a commissioner?
Yeah, look, I didn't set myself out those big major goals, but one of the things that I really wanted to ensure that people understood in my values of being a commissioner was that I was going to be a commissioner for everybody. But in being a commissioner for everybody, it meant that I had to look at where historically we never paid attention to and increase my attention to that area. And so that meant that, for established organizations where their members are generally, wider populations or more mainstream populations, that while I did focus and work with them, my attentions were on emerging organizations such as, the Pacific X community, which is an emerging LGBTQ plus Pacific First Nations community, working with asylum seekers and refugees, and really just paying attention to organizations that historically we haven't paid attention to. And that was a big goal of mine, was to establish myself in that space. And when I go to community events, and the amount of people of color and queer people or gender diverse people of color that come up to me and say thank you, or say, oh my God, I feel connected more to community now because I can see myself through you. It makes me cry when I think about it, because it is, I sought out that type of representation when I was growing up, and I didn't see it. And so the fact that I could be that for somebody else, it changes your life. You're like, oh my God, it really is so powerful to know that somebody's connected to a community or connected to a thing now because you've paved that road. And so for me and others, now that the gate to queer inclusivity for people of color is pried open, we should now think about removing the fences and just, really sing home that, we're all in this together, and we're all connected to a bigger thing.
Oh, beautiful stuff.
I know.
Let's finish off with what's happening in the near future. I mean, we've got IDAHOBIT, which is the International Day Against LGBTIQA+ Discrimination, on May 17.
Yep.
Any plans?
Oh my God, you want to see my
parties?
diary? It
You're
is.
You're a popular person.
Yeah,
it
is. I think I've chosen. I'm doing 5 events. So I've got a morning tea, lunch, afternoon tea, evening event.
Yep.
I created an IDAHOBIT video, which will be given out to all the people that are doing events, and they can play it or not play it, but then it will play on my social media that afternoon. So it gives opportunities for people to do their events. And then and it really, this IDAHOBIT is really about making sure people feel connected to the work that we're doing. We've got the strategy now here in Victoria, which is the whole of government LGBTQ+ strategy, Pride in Our Future, which really is stimulating all of the Victorian agencies and government departments to do better, and to continue the great work that they're doing by implementing stronger programs and policies that meet the needs of LGBTQ+ people.
Well, how about this? I mean, I know you've got so many things on. Is there something you can pick from the calendar to get people to go to?
One thing that we are starting very soon is a commissioner's one-on-one, like not a one-on-one, but like a commissioner's town hall, where I once a month, because I get so many meeting requests from young queer or gender diverse people who just want to pick my brains about something. We're doing a monthly, during this month I'll be online. Come and join us, hang out, have a cup of tea, and we can chat. You can meet with other people. So it's just an open invite call for anybody who wants to come and say hello and tell me their needs without it being too jam-packed in my diary. So I'll do once a month where we corral everybody, but also, it's an opportunity for others to meet each other and grow that connection. Well,
thank you so much, Todd, for chatting with me. If there's let's close up. What would you like our diverse Victorian communities to take away from our chat today?
Look, that it's okay to just be you. And
love it.
That's it. That's the Victoria that we're building, and hopefully the Australia that will follow is you are you, and we accept that and love that and honour that.
That's it, everyone. So you've heard it from the Commissioner, Todd Fernando. It's okay to be you. It's okay lovely to be you. Yeah.
It's lovely to be you.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for being the best guest on this podcast episode of Conversations with Commissioners. And my signing out is, my name is Dr. Judy Tang, and on behalf of the VMC and myself, thank you again, Todd, for having us and chatting with me today. And I'll catch up with you another time.
Absolutely. Bye.
Cheers. See ya.